that people with disability from refugee and migrant backgrounds slip through some of the cracks of services and supports. And so they're going to all share their perspective and their learnings, and in particular what they see as way forwards or improvements and changes that would help. Before I introduce Meagan, I just wanted to let you know first that we'll have time for questions after each speaker, but we also might have a bit of time, if our speakers stick to time, at the end to have a little bit of a panel and ask some questions to all the speakers. So the times in your program will be a little bit different to what we'll actually be following for this session. So in our earlier sessions, we heard from Soraya from Barwon, and she spoke about her experience and was very generous in sharing her story of how she's found the NDIS. And she and Steph Gunn both mentioned an organisation called DiversiStat. So we were so thrilled that Meagan Price was able to come up from Barwon or from Geelong and join us because Barwon was one of the very first areas to, it was the first one of the first trial sites for the NDIS. And so for several years now, they've been really trialling and seeing what works for refugee communities in terms of linking them and connecting with the NDIS. But they've also then, I think, learnt a lot of lessons about what might also be needed. And I know that when at Ampara, we started our work in talking to coal communities about the NDIS, there really wasn't a lot when you Googled cold and NDIS that came up. But one thing that came up was a really invaluable report that DiversiStat wrote around their findings. I think it was called Findings, was it? Yes. DiversiStat Findings, and that's still on their website, and Meagan's just going to hold it up. And really, there's so many lessons in that for us that we refer to in our work. So they've really led the way in many ways. So we're really grateful for that work that's been done, and we've learned a lot from it. So Meagan's been working at DiversiStat on a new program a disability program, at DiversiStat. And she's also, as Stephanie said, keeps telling the NDIS what needs to happen, and DiversiStat keeps saying you need to do these different things. And I think that's probably something we all need to keep doing as well. And I think from what Steph said, they're very open to that and willing to listen and learn. So perhaps now we'll all listen and learn a little bit from Meagan. Thank you, Meagan.
Thanks, Lolita. Thank you, and thanks to Amparo and Griffith. It's been a wonderful forum so far and some really great speakers. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and any elders past and present. So, as mentioned, my name's Meg. I work as the disability team leader with DiversiStat. We have a disability service called Diversibility. Just as a bit of background, DiversiStat's been working in the Geelong region for the past 40 years, providing services to culturally and linguistically diverse people in a range of areas. We have a training arm, we've got settlement services, we work with a community radio station, and we've even got things like a cafe and a op shop now as well, so we're ever growing. We've got established relationships with 50 culturally and linguistically diverse associations representing the different ethnic communities in the Barwon region. So just briefly, some stats have been mentioned already today, but up to 20% of people in Australia have a disability, and of those, 1 in 4 people with a disability and 1 in 4 carers are estimated to be from a cold background. In Geelong, more than 16% were born overseas. There are barriers for cold people. Sorry, I should be shuffling through these slides as well. So there are barriers for cold people in accessing services. These are at the individual and at the service provision level. Some barriers at the individual level can include literacy and a proficiency in English language. So that includes literacy in their own language as well. A knowledge of disability services and their own entitlements. the potential for stigma and shame within their own community, negative stereotypes about ethnicity in the general community, a distrust of service providers. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, a distrust of service providers and a reluctance to leave family members in another person's care. And some may fear to disclose information about their disability because of an insecurity and uncertainty of their visa status. At the service provision level, barriers can include a lack of translated information or access to interpreters with disability awareness, a lack of culturally appropriate assessment processes, a lack of a clear diagnosis, and with no history in Australia, referrals can be difficult to obtain. The NDIS model also assumes that people know about the disability system, that they will seek out access to support themselves, that they know what supports are on offer, and how to define and articulate their goals. These are foreign concepts to many people. So the current situation: to be eligible for the NDIS, a person must have a permanent disability that impacts on their function. They need to be citizens or permanent residents. So within that, refugees who come with permanent residency are eligible. And they need to be under 65 when an access request form is submitted. A snapshot of the current situation: NDIS states that all sites have lower than expected COLD participants, except for the Northern Territory. As at the 30th of June of this year, the NDIS reported 2.2% of NDIS participants with a plan were from a COLD background. In Queensland, this figure is 2.5%. The percentage in Victoria hasn't changed since 2014. While the numbers of COLD people entering the scheme have increased, the overall percentage has not changed. Nationally, this figure is 4% of participants are coming from a COLD background. We would expect to see 15 to 20% of participants coming from a COLD background. So people from So this suggests that people are significantly underrepresented in the disability system. It suggests that the NDIS is not meeting the specific needs of COLD people with disability, and that people from a COLD background are not receiving the necessary support that they are entitled to. This information, it's published quarterly by the NDIS. If you just go on their website and search quarterly reports, you can see the COLD stats each quarter. So our work, we began in late 2013. We had an advocacy focus at the start and an intention to influence the NDIS and their cultural accessibility, competency and safety. In 2014, we researched and produced the report that Lolita held up, and we began providing a service to NDIS participants through 2 line items in the NDIS. They're called support connection and coordination of supports, and they have kind of like a case management function. Through this, we help people to connect to services, to become more involved in community. We help coordinate the services in their plan and help to develop their capacity. We also have some projects. So we have a Readiness and Advocacy project, which raises awareness about the disability system, entitlements and the NDIS with new arrivals and established communities. We do advocacy to the NDIS and to disability service providers and settlement service providers. And this project is funded through a philanthropic grant. We also have an action research project that we're working on currently. This is funded by the NDIA. So the NDIA recognise that they are not working effectively with what they call hard to reach populations, and in recognition of the success that we have had linking people from a culturally and linguistically diverse background with the NDIS, they've asked us to trial our approach with different hard-to-reach groups. So these include people involved in the criminal justice system, people living in supported residential services, people from an Aboriginal background, and people who are homeless or experiencing homelessness. The main highlight for us, for our work, is that culturally and linguistically diverse people with disability and their families who have had no previous engagement with the disability system in Australia now have the necessary supports in place. They have NDIS plans and have been connected to disability service providers. This means that people are now participating in the community, accessing equipment, receiving support and respite when they haven't before. It also shows us that with targeted support, COLD people will engage with the disability system, and there are approaches that will work. So our findings and impact. The impact on the NDIA. We've been successful in advocating for interpreting and translating of personal key documents and additional interpreting hours in participants' NDIS plans. Stephanie listed some of the information that has been translated into a range of different languages. We have also had success in advocating for an individual from a different language group to have their individual documents translated. The NDIS has different categories of complexity for coordination of supports. It can be applied quite arbitrarily in practice, but through individual advocacy, we've been able to advocate for the higher complexity category for COLD participants when necessary. We've successfully appealed an NDIS decision refusing new arrivals from a refugee background access to the scheme due to the date of arrival. I'm not sure if that's the case in all areas that the NDIS is working, but certainly in Geelong, if someone arrived after the date of launch of the NDIS rollout in Geelong, they were told that they weren't able to access the scheme at that time. So we applied under the exceptional circumstances clause. And that legislation was tested nationally. We were able to get that participant and all participants who came after him access to the scheme immediately. So there has been precedent. If you're told that someone is not able to access the scheme because of their date of arrival in a launch site, please appeal that decision because there is precedent. As you've heard from Stephanie, there is a COLD strategy that is underway. We'd like to think that we've had some impact in calling for a COLD strategy. And some NDIS documents are translated into a range of established languages. The NDIA is also open to requests to meet clients at our office, where many clients feel quite comfortable because of the settlement services that they've received there. And the NDIA in the Barwon region have requested cultural competency training for their staff, specifically related to Afghan participants. So it's a starting point. We'd love to do cultural competency training in a range of other areas, but at this point in time, that's the only one that we've requested. We're also really proud of the fact that we've brought culturally and linguistically diverse people, their voice and their perspectives to the table and enabled them to speak for themselves as well about their engagement with the NDIS. And we've highlighted the experience of people from a COLD background through individual case studies. Our clients also have a profound impact on us and the service, the quality of our service. You heard from Soraya before that there's negative feedback as well, not just for the NDIS but also service providers. We really, really welcome those complaints. We haven't done it very effectively in the past, but it's the way that we can improve. And we like to be transparent about our criticism as well, because we have been working in this area since 2013. There are other organisations like us that can learn from the criticism that we receive from our participants. We hope that you can take that also on board to help your services. The impact on the disability service providers. Disability service providers in Geelong have rated culturally and linguistically diverse support as a key issue that the sector needs to address. So they know it's an issue, it's just that they're not really working on it very well in our area. Some services are seeking information and requesting support to improve their practices, but there's still a long way to go. We've seen an increase in cultural competency training participants coming from the disability sector. So we provide cultural competency training, and we take note of what organisations people are coming from when they receive that training, and there is definitely an increase of disability service providers seeking that training. We also have many speaking requests, like this one. So there are organisations who are very keen to learn from our experience. Impact on settlement service providers. There's been a number of silo services that have been mentioned today, and I'd like to add to that the settlement services. Traditionally, disability services and settlement services, certainly in Victoria, have worked in isolation. There hasn't been a great communication between the two. It's a really siloed approach. So the NDIS actually offers an opportunity for settlement service providers to provide supports under the NDIS and make that support for a new arrival much more holistic instead of telling them that they need to go elsewhere. A recent presentation to the Victorian Settlement Services has led to the establishment of a working group on culturally and linguistically diverse people with disability to better support COLD people and engage with the disability sector when they first arrive. So some of the findings that we've had, there is a very, very small margin in certain NDIS line items. So if you're a provider or you're considering being a provider, I really encourage you to do financial modelling before you start to provide certain services. In order to reach non-literate vision impaired clients from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, we've found that some approaches that you could consider include community radio in different languages, especially programs, in different languages. I'd encourage you to ask community leaders, bilingual workers who live locally, and clients of other services if they know of people with disability who might benefit from being engaged with the NDIS, because it is difficult to find people initially. Other options can include reaching COLD people through places they go regularly, so places of worship or ethnic supermarkets, and put a range of media as well, so community radio, printed material, having a presence at certain places as well with bilingual support. We've found that small group readiness sessions with bilingual support did not lead to a greater understanding of the NDIS for new arrivals, and staff were having to cover the information again in individual meetings. So we changed our approach to provide one-to-one readiness support and practical assistance, including gathering evidence and accompanying clients to visit the NDIS in person to link with the NDIS. This might be different for established communities. We've found that it's so, but certainly group readiness sessions for new arrivals were not effective in our area. There is no NDIS funding for readiness support to assist access. A lot of our staff time is spent supporting people to access the scheme, and this is unfunded by the NDIS. So we provide one-to-one support for people to access the scheme because we find that the most effective. We provide that through different block funding. For us, it's through our humanitarian settlement services and complex case block funding, with some funding support through our grant-based projects. Local area coordinators may have a role to play in assisting people to access the NDIS, but I can't tell you how exactly because they're not fulfilling this role in the Barwon area, and they won't be until 2018. I'll let you know your Queensland local area coordinator contacts in a moment. So we've found the need to really work with people from a refugee background to articulate the functional impact of their disability, their needs and their goals prior to their NDIS planning meeting, as often people who've come from an environment without a functional disability system have had their own characteristics and lack of support, opportunities and options normalised for themselves. Evidence from recent qualitative interviews with our NDIS participants from a refugee background, new arrivals, has shown us that more work is required to give clients a better understanding of the system and the complaints options. This information needs to be in a range of formats and repeated at different times, as it's forgotten if only provided when someone first arrives at settlement. So, for example, we provide that information during orientation, and then when we engage with people directly one-on-one and support them to put in their access request form and through their planning meeting. And still, on interviewing people, it wasn't a representative sample, it's only 10 clients that we've interviewed in the past month. They were unable to articulate often what the NDIS was, the difference between our service and the NDIS. It's not through a lack of providing this information, but it's also the stress that someone feels when they are settling into a new community. This can have an impact on their ability to retain new information. So I'd really encourage you to repeatedly talk about the complaints process and what the services are at different points in time. Many disability service providers and health providers are hesitant to work with interpreters because they're not aware of the free services available to them once they register. Instead, they often rely on family members to interpret, and this increases the burden of care on family members. Clients prefer to use, this is in our findings with our qualitative interviews, our clients have generally prefer to use face-to-face interpreters instead of phone interpreting. Although when talking about mental health issues, we've found that that's an exception and they prefer to use phone interpreters because of sensitivity and because of a lot of the communities are quite small in Geelong. We've found that support, connection or coordination of supports is necessary for new arrivals, given their settlement needs. That sounds like a bit of drumming up business for ourselves, but it is being able to talk, to link people with services we've just found that that's very necessary for new arrivals who are unfamiliar with the disability system and what supports are on offer in a new environment. At another forum recently, an NDIS engagement staff member said that coordination of supports, that line item, is to build capacity, and it's not likely to be necessary after 12 months. I called him up on that. I think that's really idealistic. I think for new arrivals and for many cold people, most will need coordination of supports for a few years, and many may need it forever. It's not always to do with their comprehension, it's to do with, especially initially, the range of things that they're trying to sort out when they're settling is overwhelming. Support coordination hours need to be accessible to replace family care if necessary. Often cold families care for family members with a disability, but it shouldn't be assumed that this is the individual or the carer's preference. They need to know that they have options. A big issue for people with disability arriving in Australia is the lack of diagnosis and history. Whilst the NDIS focuses on the impact of the disability, some sort of diagnosis needs to be given before a person is eligible. This is particularly true for cognitive impairments and acquired brain injuries. Public health wait times for these assessments can be very lengthy and delaying a person's access to the NDIS and necessary supports. People with disability in Australia generally have their needs identified early and supports are put in place as needed. In contrast, people who arrive in Australia generally arrive with no supports in place and have no access to any supports until they have their NDIS plan. Currently, it's taking around 4 to 6 months in the Barwon area between linking a person to the NDIS and having a plan in place. This impacts on the individual and their family's ability to settle and attend English classes, etc., etc. So equipment needs are often the highest need for people who arrive with a physical disability. Equipment such as wheelchairs, walking frames and shower chairs are funded by the NDIS, but first people need to submit their access request form, they need to have their planning done, they need to have assessments which need to be approved by the NDIS and the equipment provider. If the equipment is not off the rack, then this needs to be made. And this process can take over a year. That can be a year where a person is not sitting in a suitable wheelchair, if they have one at all. It may also be a year where no other supports can be provided, as disability support providers will not be keen to provide support to a person without the proper equipment. So on a positive note, after all that, our interviews with clients have revealed that participants were surprised at the level of support they were able to receive in Australia, and all of them, without exclusion, spoke of the positive influence the NDIS has had on their lives and their independence once they have a plan. So if you want to get in touch with the Queensland local area coordinators in the Mackay, how do I say that word? Mackay. Not a local. In the Mackay rollout area, Carers Queensland and Connections Inc. have been selected to deliver the local area coordinator function until the 31st of January 2017. In the Toowoomba rollout area, Parent to Parent and Mental Illness Fellowship Queensland have been selected to deliver the local area coordinator function until the 31st of January 2017. And from February 2017, local area coordination services in Queensland will be delivered by the NDIS local area coordinator partners in the community. That information is directly off the NDIS website. So some take-home messages. People from a cold background are not accessing the NDIS in expected numbers. Barriers can include language and literacy and knowledge of the disability system and supports on offer, and the NDIS model assumes that there is knowledge about the system, that people will seek out support themselves, that they know what's on offer and how to define their goals. But we have found that targeted support does lead to cold people accessing the NDIS. This support is unfunded. For us, it's generally taking about 5 to 8 hours of staff time to explain about the system, fill in the forms, gather evidence and link someone, physically often, link someone to the NDIS. But we have had one participant's taken up to 50 hours to do that, so that's unfunded staff time by the NDIS. Fortunately, we can access funding through our other block funding. And that it's essential for support coordination and interpreting to be in clients' plans if it's necessary. And there needs to be enough interpreting hours for them to engage with services. So initially we were seeing interpreting hours were inadequate. There was enough interpreting for someone to talk with the NDIS and get through the planning process, but then there wasn't enough hours for them to implement their plan over the following year. I'll finish by saying that probably the best thing anyone can do in regard to supporting cold people to access the NDIS is to know your local office, your local NDIA office, and if relevant, your local area coordination provider. They can answer your questions, give information, and on occasion fast-track applications. Oops. Sorry, 1 minute later. So if you want to find our report, you can just Google Diversitat Disability Findings Report. We're planning to put out an updated version of the report by the end of the year, and this includes case studies. The results of our action research project linking other hard-to-reach groups with the NDIS will be available early next year, and this report articulates our model of support if it's something that you'd like to also do. That's it. Thanks.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Meagan, for all those, the different areas that you covered, from that initial access all the way through to down the track when people might need interpreters for their plans. I'm sure there might be questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask Meagan?
It's not on.
My name is Mercy Akongo, and I work with the Ethnic Community Services Cooperative in New South Wales. And I work as a team leader on a capacity building project. And that's just a project that is focusing on getting people ready for the Ndis transition. Mine is almost not like a question, it's like adding a comment onto what you've said, because we've just shared some of the great experiences that people coming from CALD background actually go through while accessing the Ndis. At Ethnic Community Services, what we do is that we run workshops like to prepare people for the Ndis. And one of the things that I want to mention at the beginning, before even saying that, is that the Ndis process is very hard. It's very complicated, and it comes with a lot of information. It's not very easy for anyone to really understand it. Even for us who do run it, we need to cross-check all the time because information keeps changing, and the information are also not readily available. You need to search for it, you need to interpret it, you need to on how to use it. So it's very, very difficult for someone coming from a non-English speaking background actually to even use the information. So through the Ethnic Community Services, what we do is we have two information sessions that we give. The first one is just giving the information, which run for 2.5 hours. And we do group one because you just mentioned that the group one actually doesn't work in your case. What we do is that we run workshop according to the language group. So we have interpreters, and we go group language by language group, and we run the information session. But we also do a follow-up workshop, which is more practical. So that is a more practical step-to-step kind of information session where people are taken through a practical exercise of actually getting ready for the Ndis, like filling forms, identifying their needs, and for instance, identifying the service providers, yes, that they would work with, and also taking them through practical things like budgeting and things like that. We just want to help them to understand it deeper. The second workshop is just to help them to understand, because I know they would receive the support again from the local areas coordinators who will help them with the planning and things like that. But I just want to say that I don't know in Queensland, because it's still new, I've been talking to Level, and I've discovered that actually people coming from CALD background are not receiving enough support, and that is dangerous because they are going to be left without enough support. They're going to be left going into like applying for the services without understanding it and missing out a lot. They will not be able to fully utilize or even take advantage of the Ndis services that is available. It would be actually helpful if there were services available, like for instance, providing information sessions, but not just one information session, but also follow-up workshop, which are more practical. For us, we call it the pre-planning workshop, which actually it's more practical. We also have a team of, like, have Awa here. She works more with they do in individual advocacy, where they also follow up on one-to-one, like they provide one-to-one support after they've received the information session, they have attended the pre-planning workshops, and some of them still need actually to be followed up to make sure they understand the process and that they are connected to the right services. So I think I would just recommend actually for, in Queensland here, if such services would be provided to be more helpful, because in New South Wales, where it's already happening, we've been working on the Ndis since 2013 when it first started, and there's a lot of lessons that we've learned, and we've been doing a lot of advocacy with the Ndia, giving feedbacks, and also working in collaboration with ADEC, trying to push back like feedbacks from the community, from participants on what their experiences are. It's not easy. Even accessing the Ndia itself is very hard. We have contacts given out. We have the website. We have all these things and say, hey, contact us for support. But actually, the process of accessing them is very difficult. People have tried to call the Ndia, and they can't actually access them, especially people coming from CALD background. Recently, after we lodged a complaint to the Ndia and saying accessing you actually is a big problem. People are struggling to get you. And then they said, oh, we have a form on the website. People coming from CALD background can go and fill up a form and state down their needs and their language, and then we'll get back to them. doesn't work, because navigating the website can be actually very hard for people from CALD background. It's just, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mercy, and thank you for coming, and I'll let Meagan respond.
I guess one of the messages there is if you're doing readiness sessions, be flexible and get feedback from those that are attending. If it's going to work in small groups with language support, go for it. It didn't work in our case. We had language support and we were in cultural groups as well. If you need to do one-on-one sessions, if that's going to link people, if it's going to be more effective, please be flexible and do that if necessary. I agree, there's a lack of information. It's not helpful to tell people to go to the website, especially if there are language and literacy issues. As an example, as far as I know, and I did check today, the access request form, which is a form that everyone needs to fill in, is only in English. So while they are making headway in translating some key documents, the essential documents that link people to the NDIS, the first port of call has not been translated. So there's certainly there's a long way to go.